Jarrod Schulz built a version of himself that millions of people believed in. A convicted felon who served 16 months in state prison walked out at 21 with nothing but a criminal record and a decision to be different, and over the next 2 decades he turned that decision into a family, a career in reality television, and a public story so complete it could have been written for the screen. Then he walked into a bar in Orange County on a night in April 2021 and dismantled every bit of it in minutes. The question worth sitting with isn't how he fell. It's how he got so close to making it permanent, and why the final stretch of the journey proved impossible to finish. The legal trouble that set everything in motion arrived on January 27, 1997, when police arrested him for possession of methamphetamine. He was in his early 20s, substance abuse already a recurring problem, and the pattern of bad decisions had been stacking long enough that the courts had taken notice. The judge, perhaps seeing something worth salvaging, handed down what looked like a manageable outcome: 60 days in a local jail and a strict probation structure afterward. Jarrod pleaded guilty, completed those 2 months, and walked back into his life believing the worst chapter was behind him. That belief survived about a week. Police picked him up again within days of his release, catching him this time driving under the influence while carrying more illegal drugs. The judge had run out of patience. Probation adjustments in county jail were finished as options. Jarrod went to state prison for 16 months, and state prison turned out to be a completely different kind of education. Local jail surrounded him with people who had made mistakes. State prison put him next to people who had made deliberate choices, violent and calculated ones, and who planned to keep making them. Murderers and long-term offenders filled the space around him daily, and someone close to the family later told a magazine that living inside that environment finally reached Jarrod in a way that nothing outside it had managed. He could see his future running in a straight line from where he was sitting to decades behind those walls, and that clarity drove a genuine decision to stop. But clarity about where you don't want to end up is not the same thing as doing the internal work of becoming someone fundamentally different, and that gap, quiet and invisible at first, would eventually cost him everything he spent the next 2 decades building. When he walked out at 21, the felony conviction followed him everywhere, along with a way of responding to pressure and conflict that incarceration had built into him without anyone identifying it as something requiring attention. 2 years out, working an honest job as a sales manager at a carpet cleaning company in Tustin, California, Jarrod met Brandy Passante. She arrived knowing his history and chose to stay anyway. For a man carrying a criminal record and a recent prison term, that kind of acceptance functions less like a romantic gesture and more like a lifeline. Their relationship moved quickly, and by 2003 they had a son named Cameron, followed 2 years later by a daughter named Peyton. Brandy became the center of gravity in Jarrod's adult life, the person whose belief in him translated directly into his ability to stay away from the habits and patterns that had once sent him to prison. She was the reason the reformed version of himself had somewhere solid to stand. During the housing boom of the early 2000s, Jarrod built a mortgage business that generated real money and genuine momentum. For a stretch of time, that success felt like confirmation that the story he was telling about himself was accurate. Then the mid-2000s housing collapse arrived and dismantled businesses across the country, and his mortgage company stopped existing overnight. Back to zero, with a family depending on him and bills he couldn't cover, he took a suggestion from his aunt, who worked at a storage facility, and tried storage auctions as a way to generate some quick income. Nobody in that conversation could have imagined where it would eventually lead. Storage Wars launched on A&E in December 2010, and Jarrod and Brandy entered the show labeled The Young Guns, an underdog couple without the financial resources of their competitors, but with enough raw chemistry and competitive energy to hold an audience. The reality television format suited them because they genuinely were what the cameras were presenting. 2 people who worked hard, argued honestly, and cared about what they were building together. The show found a massive audience, and they became its emotional core. The couple viewers tuned in for regardless of what was happening around them. For Jarrod, earning $30,000 per episode represented something beyond income. It was validation at a scale he had never imagined possible. A convicted felon from California transformed into a recognizable celebrity, appearing at industry events and building a public brand that people actually sought out. By 2014, A&E handed them their own spin-off called Brandy and Jarrod, Married to the Job. 8 episodes built around the partnership audiences had already invested in across the main show. The title used the word married, even though they had never legally formalized anything. Running alongside all of that television success was Now and Then Secondhand Store, their entrepreneurship venture and thrift store in Orange County that they had established before Storage Wars came calling. The show's popularity should have delivered a steady stream of customers through the door. During Season 4 in 2013, confidence was high enough that they opened a second location in Long Beach, which looked from the outside like expansion and growth. The Long Beach store closed in 2014, 1 year after opening. The Orange County location survived until 2016 before it also shut down for good. Both stores failed despite the kind of free publicity that most small business owners would consider a genuine advantage. Watching those closures happen must have put Jarrod back in a familiar emotional place, replaying the mortgage collapse, another legitimate effort ending despite everything put into it. Television income kept arriving, but those checks depended on network decisions and scheduling, things entirely outside his control. The stores had been meant to represent something more durable, a foundation that would outlast the cameras and provide for the family on their own terms. Instead, they became 2 more additions to a list of things he had built and watched disappear. The relationship ended in fall 2018, though the world outside their immediate circle didn't learn that until April 2021. When Storage Wars returned for Season 13 and viewers noticed something was clearly missing, Brandi and Jarrod barely interacted, bidding separately and moving through scenes without any of the chemistry that had defined them for over a decade. Brandi confirmed the separation directly in that premiere episode. She later described herself as having functioned as essentially a single parent for a significant portion of their time together, handling most of the parenting responsibilities even while the relationship was technically still intact. For 2 full years after the split, they had maintained a professional working arrangement while living entirely separate personal lives, keeping the business relationship functional while the personal one was already gone. The loss of that relationship cut into every part of Jarrod's life at once. Brandi had been his business partner, his co-star, his anchor, and the primary structural reason his daily existence stayed on a functional track. Cameron and Peyton were 17 and 15 when their parents separated, old enough to form their own opinions about what had happened and to make their own choices about where to direct their time and loyalty. Losing Brandi meant losing the framework that had held everything else in place, and without that framework, the warning signs began arriving quickly. On the night of April 30th, 2021, Brandi was at a bar in Orange County spending time with a group of friends, living a life that had nothing to do with Jarrod anymore. Nearly 3 years had passed since the split. Jarrod walked in. Police sources who spoke with TMZ described an argument that escalated quickly into something loud and public. Brandi told him to leave. He stayed, kept shouting at her and the people around her, and according to the official police report, he allegedly pushed her twice before leaving when someone in the bar called the police. Officers arrived after he had already gone. A report was filed, investigators tracked him down for questioning, and Jarrod told them he had never touched Brandi. The Orange County District Attorney's Office reached a different conclusion. In May 2021, he was formally charged with 1 count of misdemeanor domestic violence battery, and that charge landed with the particular weight that comes from pattern recognition rather than surprise. Brandi communicated more through a photograph than any interview could have managed. Months after the incident, she posted a picture of a new tattoo, the word free, alongside an image of a bird in flight, and wrote that it meant escaping a very difficult situation that too many people never managed to leave, and that she was grateful to live without fear. Without fear. Those 2 words contained an entire history that the police report only captured the final moment of, and anyone reading them carefully understood that the bar encounter hadn't been an isolated event, but rather the public surface of something much longer. A&E opened an internal review after the domestic violence charge became public. One final Jarrod appearance aired during Season 13, footage shot before April that reached screens while the charges were still fresh in the news cycle. Brandi called him an idiot for overspending on a storage unit. When both of them wanted the same locker, she sent a friend to bid in her place rather than engage with him directly. That was not playful television bickering. That was barely managed hostility between 2 people who had a history neither of them could put down. Season 14 launched without him. Season 15 continued without him. Brandi remained on the show, and Jarrod's absence became the only official statement the network ever needed to make. Storage Wars had been his identity for over a decade, the ongoing public proof that the redemption story was real and that a felony conviction didn't have to be the defining fact of a person's life. His last Instagram post dates to 2021. right around when the incident became news, and after that, he stepped out of public view without ceremony or explanation. Today, he owns the Rush Bar and Grill in Lake Forest, California, a bar he took over in 2019 when the future still seemed to offer clear options. His girlfriend, Rochelle Beckman, works as a bartender at the establishment and has remained with him through the legal fallout. Most customers who walk in reportedly have no idea the owner once earned $30,000 per episode on one of cable television's most recognized reality programs, and that anonymity is almost certainly something he works to preserve rather than disrupt. Cameron and Peyton are both in their early 20s now. They grew up watching their parents argue on national television, watch the family's businesses close in succession, watch the relationship between their parents dissolve over years rather than in a single moment, and then watch their father face a domestic violence charge involving their mother. That accumulation is the direct result of Jarrod never completing the internal work he committed to at 21, not because the intention wasn't real, but because intention and completion are entirely different things. The actual weight of this story doesn't live in the prison sentence or the charge or the career that stopped. It lives in the arithmetic of how close he came. 16 months in state prison, a genuine decision to change, honest employment, the woman who chose to believe in his potential, 2 children, a mortgage business, celebrity status in reality television, $30,000 per episode, a spin-off series, and 18 years of sustaining the reformed version of himself in front of cameras and audiences and everyone who knew him. For that entire stretch, the man on Storage Wars seemed like the real thing, and maybe he was, or close enough to it that the remaining gap stayed invisible. But by 2021, the businesses were gone, the relationship had ended, his children were establishing their own adult lives, and the television career was continuing without him as a participant. On that April night, the version of himself he had been maintaining for 2 decades finally ran out of energy to keep going. 24 years after leaving prison, Jarrod Schulz demonstrated that changing your circumstances and changing yourself are entirely separate accomplishments. The first one he managed in genuinely remarkable fashion. The second one, the quieter and harder work that happens without cameras or applause or an audience watching, that one remained unfinished. At 48, time hasn't expired on the possibility of completing it. But the story of how close he came and what the distance between almost and actually eventually cost stands as one of the clearest illustrations of why the internal work is the only work that ultimately matters.